I had been staring at the same spot on the kitchen counter for what felt like hours, the afternoon sun casting a warm glow over the chipped ceramic. Mark was on the other side of the room, humming to himself while he flipped through a magazine. Our house, the one we'd spent years building together, was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of silence that made you feel like you were stuck in a never-ending loop, each day blending into the next without anything new to break it up. "Hey, Mark," I called out, my voice breaking the stillness, though I didn't mean it to. He looked up from the magazine, his eyes soft but tired. "What's up?" I hesitated, my fingers drumming against the countertop. I hadn't planned how to say it, but I knew I had to say something. I was 39, about to turn 40, and suddenly, it felt like everything in my life had slowed down. My career, my marriage, everything. I wanted excitement again. I wanted to feel something, anything, that didn't feel like the dull ache of routine. "I've been thinking," I began, trying to sound casual, "about shaking things up a bit. You know, spicing things up." Mark raised an eyebrow, an expression I'd come to associate with either confusion or concern. "Spicing things up? What are you talking about?" I bit my lip, unsure of how to put it into words. The idea had been brewing for weeks, ever since I'd spoken with Sarah and Kate over coffee a few days ago. They'd talked about their own lives, how they'd found ways to keep things exciting and fresh. I'd listened, and then it had hit me. Maybe it wasn't just about the routine that made me feel this way. Maybe it was because I was bored with the same old routine with Mark. And maybe, just maybe, I needed to step outside of it to feel something again. I stopped myself, swallowed hard. I was thinking about proposing an open marriage. The words hung in the air between us, thick and uncomfortable. Mark's face immediately froze, his eyes narrowing. He blinked a couple of times as if trying to understand what I meant. "An open marriage?" His voice was low, unsure, the confusion morphing into something sharper. "Louise, are you serious?" "I know it sounds crazy." I rushed to explain, holding up my hands as if that would somehow lessen the absurdity of it. "But hear me out. I love you, Mark. You know that. But we've been in this same routine for so long. And I don't know. I just need something different. Something that makes me feel alive again, you know?" His expression hardened, the softness in his face disappearing as he put down the magazine and stood up slowly. "Alive? Louise, this is insane. You're talking about sleeping with other people. What does that even mean for us?" I felt the weight of his words. I had thought about it from every angle, but hearing him say it like that, it hit me harder than I expected. The truth was, I didn't know how it would work or what it would mean for us, but I needed to feel free again, in a way that didn't involve sneaking around behind his back. I thought an open marriage might be the answer. I don't know, Mark," I mumbled, pacing around the kitchen, unable to stand still. "I just want to feel excitement again. Not just in the bedroom, but in my life. I need more than just this routine." Mark shook his head, disbelief clouding his features. "You think this is going to fix things? You think you'll feel better if we open up our marriage?" "I don't know," I admitted, suddenly feeling small. "But I need to try. I want to experience something different. I don't want to feel trapped anymore." Mark stepped closer, his face inches from mine now. "You don't get to just propose something like this and expect it to be okay. I'm not going to just sit back and watch you sleep with other people." I stepped back, the sting of his words hitting harder than I thought. "I wasn't expecting that," I whispered. "I didn't think you'd be okay with it, but I don't know. I thought maybe you'd understand that I just need to feel alive again." For a long moment, there was only silence. Mark's jaw clenched as he stared at me, trying to process what I had just said. I could see the anger brewing behind his eyes, but there was also something else, a deep hurt, the kind that only came from feeling betrayed. "I need to think," he muttered, turning toward the door. "I need some time. I can't deal with this right now." Before I could say anything else, he stormed out, the door slamming behind him. I stood there, my heart racing, the weight of my words and the consequences settling over me. What had I just done? I felt a pang of guilt, quickly followed by a rush of fear. What if this was the beginning of the end for us? What if I had just destroyed everything? But then, there was a flicker of something else, a spark of possibility, of hope. Maybe this was what I needed. Maybe this was the way forward. The next morning, I woke up alone. The bed was cold where Mark usually lay beside me, and I could already feel the tension hanging thick in the air. He had left the house the night before without a word, and I spent the night tossing and turning, the weight of my proposal sitting heavy on my chest. I had hoped he would come home and we could talk, but instead, the silence felt like a wall that grew higher with every passing hour. The kids were still asleep, and I felt strangely hollow as I stared out the kitchen window, watching the sun creep up over the quiet neighborhood. This was the life I had created, stable, predictable, safe. But now it felt like a cage. I grabbed my phone and checked for any messages, but there was nothing from Mark. Just the usual texts from friends and work. I sighed and rubbed my temples. The emptiness in the house felt suffocating, like the air had been sucked out of it. Around 8 a.m., I managed to drag myself to the kitchen. I was in the middle of making a cup of coffee when I heard the sound of Mark's truck pulling into the driveway. My heart skipped a beat, but I wasn't sure if I was relieved or more anxious. I heard the door slam, followed by footsteps coming down the hall. "Louise." Mark's voice called from the doorway, rough and tired. I turned around, my breath caught in my throat. "Mark, hey." He didn't look at me. Instead, he walked past me and into the living room, sitting down heavily on the couch. His face was a mask of frustration, his eyes tired and bloodshot. It was clear he had hardly slept. I stood there, feeling awkward and exposed, unsure of what to say. "Are you okay?" He didn't answer right away. He just stared at the floor, his hands clenched into fists. "I don't know, Louise," he muttered after a long pause. "I don't know if I'm okay." I felt a pang of guilt at his words, but I couldn't stop myself from pressing on. "I didn't mean to hurt you. I needed to feel something different. You felt it too, haven't you? The routine. The same thing every day." Mark's eyes finally met mine, and there was a flash of something in them. Anger, disappointment, maybe even a little bit of fear. "I don't know what I'm supposed to feel right now, Louise. You just dropped this bomb on me. You want an open marriage. You want to sleep with other people. And you think I'm supposed to just be okay with that?" I swallowed hard, stepping toward him. "I never said I wanted to sleep with someone else right away. I just what? Experiment?" Mark interrupted, his voice rising slightly. "You don't get to just experiment with our marriage like it's some kind of game, Louise. This is real. This is my life too." I stepped back, his words stinging more than I expected. "I know. I didn't mean to make it sound like that. But I need to feel alive again. I don't want to feel like I'm just going through the motions anymore. And I thought maybe this could help." Mark's face softened for just a moment, but then it hardened again, as if a wall had come up between us. "You think this will help? You think this will fix anything?" "I don't know," I said quietly. "I thought it might. But now, I don't know." He stared at me, his gaze distant, and for a long moment, neither of us spoke. The silence felt oppressive, the weight of my words hanging between us like a thick fog. Finally, Mark spoke again, his voice low and heavy. "I don't know if I can do this, Louise. I don't know if I can handle this. I thought we were happy. I thought we had something good. But now, you're telling me I'm not enough." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. I had never intended to make him feel that way, but I knew deep down that I had. The guilt washed over me, making it harder to breathe. "I didn't mean it like that," I whispered, my voice trembling. "Mark, you're more than enough. I don't know what's missing, but I feel like I'm suffocating. And I thought maybe this could help us find something new, something exciting again." Mark shook his head, his face hardening once more. "I can't do this. I can't just agree to something like this and pretend it's not going to destroy us. You can't just put me through this, Louise. I don't care what you think is missing. I won't be part of this. Not like this." The finality in his voice sent a shiver down my spine. He was done. He couldn't even look at me anymore. "I need to think," he said, his words distant. "I'm going for a drive." And then he stood up, walked to the door, and left, the sound of the door slamming behind him echoing through the house. I stood there for what felt like hours, the silence now deafening. My chest tightened as I sank into the couch, tears welling up in my eyes. What had I done? I thought about the conversations I had with my friends, how they told me that this could be a good thing, how they made it sound so simple, so liberating. But now, I was sitting here, wondering if I had just torn apart everything I cared about. Maybe I had been selfish. Maybe I had been so focused on my own desires that I had forgotten what truly mattered, the love and commitment we had built over the years. But now I didn't know how to undo it. I didn't know how to go back. A couple of weeks had passed since that night with Mark, and nothing had felt the same since. He hadn't come back home yet, and I could feel the distance between us growing with every passing day. He spent his time at work, coming home late, staying in the guest room, and avoiding me whenever he could. I could hear the frustration in his voice when we spoke, but it was always short and cold, like we were strangers who had nothing left to say. I'd never felt so isolated in my own home. And yet, as much as I missed him, a part of me still felt the same, like I was suffocating. It wasn't just about Mark anymore. It was about me, about what I needed, and about what I felt I had lost. I had spent so many years as Mark's wife, as a mother, as someone who did what was expected, never asking for more. But now, I was asking for more, and it felt like I was in freefall. It started innocently enough. I downloaded a few dating apps. Nothing too serious, just browsing. It wasn't about finding someone else, not really. It was about feeling wanted again. I hadn't felt desired in so long. Not by Mark. Not by anyone. The first few messages were harmless. Casual chats with guys who thought I was interesting enough to talk to. No harm in it, right? After all, Mark had his own outlets. His gym, his work, his friends. Why couldn't I have a little fun, too? One evening, I found myself meeting up with James. He was in his late 20s, a coworker who always flirted with me at the office. I knew it was nothing more than a few casual drinks. Nothing that would lead to anything serious. I told myself it was just a distraction, a way to get out of my head. But when James smiled at me across the bar, his easy confidence and his attention made me feel something I hadn't felt in a long time, alive. He leaned in, his eyes not leaving mine, and I felt a surge of heat rush through me. It was thrilling, exciting. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like a background character in my own life. I could feel the guilt gnawing at me, but I shoved it aside. I deserved this. I deserved to feel wanted. After everything, wasn't this what I had been missing? My body, my mind, they craved it. We ended the night at his apartment, and I told myself it was just a one-time thing, that it meant nothing. But the next day, I found myself texting him again, making plans for another night out. He was fun. He was young, free, and didn't ask questions. He made me forget everything that was wrong with my life. But the more time I spent with James, the more I realized I wasn't just looking for excitement. I was looking for an escape from the quiet, suffocating routine that had crept into my marriage. An escape from Mark, from my responsibilities, from everything that had anchored me down for so long. The next few weeks blurred together. I found myself going out more, meeting James more often, sneaking around behind Mark's back. I didn't even feel the need to explain myself anymore. Why should I? Mark wasn't asking questions. He was distant, detached. Why should I keep pretending everything was fine when it wasn't? At home, things continued to deteriorate. Mark and I barely spoke, and when we did, it was about the kids, the bills, the logistics. I could see the hurt in his eyes whenever he looked at me. It was like I had betrayed him, and maybe I had. But I couldn't stop myself. It felt good to feel wanted again, to be someone other than just Mark's wife or the mother of our children. One evening, after another night spent with James, I came home late to find Mark sitting in the living room. He didn't say anything at first. He just looked at me, his expression unreadable, his jaw tight. The silence between us felt unbearable. "You're late," he said, his voice cold. I knew what he was asking without him having to say it outright. But I wasn't ready to confront it. Not yet. I started, my words faltering as I tried to make up some excuse, but nothing came. I couldn't lie to him, not with the way he was looking at me. His eyes were tired, drained. He knew. He had to know. Mark stood up, pushing a hand through his hair. "How long, Louise? How long has this been going on?" I took a step back, caught off guard by the directness in his voice. I didn't have an answer. What could I say? That I was falling apart. That I needed more than he could give me. That I wanted something different, something outside of this marriage. He sighed, shaking his head. "I can't do this. I can't pretend like everything is fine while you're out there living a completely different life. While you're with him, while you're doing whatever you're doing." I could feel the guilt eating away at me, but I couldn't stop myself from defending it. "I'm not doing anything wrong," I said, but even I didn't believe it. I had tried to convince myself it was just a phase, that it was just about feeling good for once. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. I had crossed a line, and there was no going back. "You're right," Mark replied quietly. "I can't stop you, but I won't be part of this. I can't watch you destroy everything we've built." He turned and walked out of the room, and I stood there, my chest tight, tears stinging at the corners of my eyes. What had I done? What had I turned this into? The reality of the situation started to hit me, and I wondered if I had made the biggest mistake of my life. But in the back of my mind, I couldn't shake the feeling that maybe this was the only way I could get the freedom I was looking for. Maybe this was the only way I could breathe again. The days after that night with Mark felt like I was walking through fog. Every interaction we had felt cold, distant, and strained. I could feel the emotional gap between us widening with every passing day, like I was living in two separate worlds. At home, things were tense, and Mark barely spoke to me unless it was to discuss something logistical, school events, bills, the kids. But even then, his words felt hollow, like he was speaking to someone he didn't really know anymore. I spent a lot of time avoiding him, too. I didn't know how to bridge the gap between us, and part of me, deep down, was afraid of what I might find if I tried. I kept seeing James, whenever I could, indulging in the brief distractions that made me forget the reality I was avoiding. It wasn't that I didn't still care about Mark. It was just that everything felt so heavy, like I was suffocating under the weight of my own life. One afternoon, about a week after our last real conversation, I walked into the living room to find Mark sitting on the couch, his arms crossed, his gaze focused on something only he could see. It was the first time in days that he was still long enough to talk to me, and I knew, without a doubt, that he had made a decision. "Louise," he said quietly, not looking at me. "We need to talk." I stopped in my tracks. His voice was calm, too calm. It made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I knew this conversation wasn't going to go the way I had hoped. "I've been thinking," Mark continued, his tone still unervingly neutral, "about what you said. About the open marriage and everything that's happened since." I nodded, though I didn't know what to say. I wasn't sure what I expected. An apology, a plea to make things work, maybe an argument. But I didn't think it would be this cold, detached version of Mark. The man who used to be so in tune with me, so connected to everything we built together, was now a stranger sitting across from me, someone who had emotionally checked out. "I've thought about it a lot," he went on, finally turning to face me, his eyes devoid of the warmth they once held. "And I can't do it. I can't keep living in this marriage, not with how things are. Not with what you want." I felt a tightness in my chest. "Mark, no." He cut me off, raising a hand as if to stop me. "I've been holding on, trying to understand, trying to get where you're coming from. But I've realized something. I don't think I can keep pretending like this is going to work. I'm not going to beg you to stay or promise you things I can't keep. I think, at this point, we're just two people living under the same roof, pretending everything's fine." I swallowed hard. The sting of his words hit me harder than I expected. My eyes blurred with unshed tears, but I didn't dare let them fall. "Mark, please, just don't shut me out. I know I messed up, but I'm still here. I still care about you. I don't want this to be the end." He shook his head slowly, his lips pressed together in a thin line. "I can't be the one to fix this, Louise. I can't keep pretending everything's okay when it's not. And I'm not going to sit around while you go off and live some new life. I'm not going to wait for you to come back to me. I can't keep doing that. It's too painful. Mark, please." My voice cracked, and I hated how weak I sounded. "I never wanted to hurt you. I thought this could be a way for both of us to be happy, to feel fulfilled again." "I know you did," he said, his voice softer now, but there was no mistaking the finality in his words. "But I can't give you what you're asking for. I don't think I ever could, and I don't think you can give me what I need either." I blinked rapidly, trying to stop the tears that threatened to spill. I didn't want to feel like this, but it was too late. Mark had made up his mind. "I think it's time we face the fact that we're no longer the same people we were when we started this marriage," he said, standing up from the couch. "Maybe we've grown apart. Maybe we're just not meant to be together anymore." The words landed like a punch to my stomach. It felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me, leaving me floating in midair, unsure of what came next. "I'm not asking you to leave," he continued, his voice quiet but firm. "But I think it's clear that we need space. Time to figure out what we want. What's next? I don't know what that looks like, but I don't think it involves us pretending everything's fine." I nodded slowly, unable to speak. The lump in my throat was too big. I couldn't form words, couldn't say the things I wanted to say. He was right. We had changed, and I had played a huge part in that. But I hadn't expected it to go this far. I hadn't expected him to make this decision, to emotionally detach so completely. "I'm going to start staying at a friend's place for a while," he said, his voice tinged with sadness. "I think we need some time apart." He walked toward the door without another word. My heart felt like it was being crushed under the weight of his silence. I didn't move, didn't try to stop him, because in a way, I knew he was right. I had pushed him too far, and now he was walking away. The door clicked shut behind him, and I stood in the empty space, the echo of his departure ringing in my ears. This was it. This was the moment I had been dreading, the moment I had unknowingly been rushing toward. I had asked for freedom, for excitement, for something different, and in doing so, I had lost everything. The days after Mark left were a blur of emotions I wasn't sure how to handle. He had made his choice, and now I was left to face the consequences of my own. I told myself I could handle it. After all, I had wanted this freedom, hadn't I? I had sought excitement, and now it seemed like I had it. But at what cost? The house was eerily quiet, and the weight of Mark's absence hung heavy in every room. I spent most of my days avoiding the truth, keeping busy with work, with meeting James, with anything to numb the pang of guilt that gnawed at me every time I thought about Mark, about what I had done to us. But no matter how many distractions I found, there was one thing I couldn't ignore: the kids. I had always been there for them. Mark and I had built our lives around them, around creating a home, a family, something steady and dependable. But now, my children were aware of the tension, the growing distance between their father and me. Matthew, my oldest, had started to stay in his room more, his eyes dark with confusion every time he looked at me. Zara, the youngest, was quieter than usual, watching me closely with a wariness that made my heart ache. It was a few days after Mark left when I noticed how distant they had become. I came home from meeting James one afternoon to find them sitting in front of the TV, their faces blank. They barely acknowledged me as I walked in. "Hey, guys, how was your day?" I tried, forcing my voice to sound light, but it came out stiff, strained. They both mumbled something in response. Nothing meaningful, nothing that felt like the connection we once had. I knew I had to talk to them. But how? How do I explain to my children that I had chosen to tear their family apart? How do I make them understand that I was still their mother, even though everything had changed? Later that evening, when they had finished dinner, I sat them both down at the kitchen table. They avoided my gaze, their eyes fixed on their plates. I felt the weight of their silence pressing down on me. "Look, I know things have been different," I started, but the words didn't sound right. I cleared my throat. "I want to explain some things to you both, okay?" Zara, always the more sensitive one, looked up at me with a frown. "Where's Dad?" The question hit me like a slap, and I had to fight to keep my voice steady. "He's staying with a friend right now." "Why?" she asked, her voice small, unsure. I glanced at Matthew, but he was staring at the table, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. He hadn't said much since Mark left, and I could see the hurt in his silence. I felt a pang of regret twist inside me, but I pushed it down. "Things between your dad and I haven't been going well," I said, struggling to find the right words. "And sometimes, when people don't get along, they need some time apart to figure things out." Zara's face crumpled slightly, and I could feel the sting of guilt hit me like a wave. She was too young for this. She didn't deserve any of it. "Is it because of you?" she asked, looking at me with wide eyes, almost accusatory. My stomach twisted. I hesitated, unsure of how to answer. The truth felt too painful, but they needed to know something, anything, so they could understand why everything had changed. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "Zara, no, this isn't your fault," I said softly, reaching across the table to touch her hand. "Your dad and I we weren't happy, not like we used to be. And sometimes, people change. Sometimes they grow apart." Matthew finally looked up, his eyes narrow, filled with anger. "So this is what you wanted? You wanted Dad to leave?" he asked, his voice shaking with frustration. I flinched at the accusation in his words. "No, Matthew," I whispered, my voice cracking. "I never wanted that. I stopped myself, realizing there was no easy way to explain it. There was no way to make them understand why I had made the choices I did. How could I make them understand when I didn't even fully understand it myself? "You don't get it, Mom," Matthew said bitterly, standing up from the table. "You don't get how much this hurts. I don't care what you and Dad were going through. You shouldn't have dragged us into it. We don't have a choice in this. But you do. He stormed off, leaving me with Zara, who had tears welling in her eyes. She looked at me, her expression filled with confusion and hurt. "Why did you do it, Mom?" she asked quietly. "Why couldn't you fix it?" I swallowed hard, struggling to hold back my own tears. I thought I could fix myself by doing something different. I thought it would make me happy, Zara. I thought it would help. Zara didn't say anything else. She just stood up and walked out of the room, leaving me alone with my guilt. The weight of my choices crushed me. I had acted impulsively, seeking something I thought would fill the emptiness inside of me. But now, I saw the consequences. The damage to my family, to my kids. And no matter how much I wanted to pretend it wasn't happening, I couldn't escape it. Mark's absence wasn't just affecting me. It was affecting them. And I had no idea how to fix any of it. As the night dragged on, I sat in the silence, my mind racing with thoughts of what I had done. I had never felt more alone. It had been 3 months since Mark left. The space between us felt endless, and yet, every day was a reminder of how much I had lost. We were living parallel lives now, each of us caught in our own world of hurt, guilt, and unspoken words. The kids had become more distant, more withdrawn. They barely talked to me anymore, and when they did, it was always about their schedules, their homework, their activities, things that didn't matter in the long run. Not when the foundation of our family had cracked and crumbled. Mark had been quiet, too. After the night he walked out, we barely communicated. He'd texted me a few times about the kids or about practical matters, things like who was picking them up from school or which parent was handling the doctor's appointment. But those messages were more like transactional exchanges than any form of real communication. He had started spending time with Emily, his sister. I knew because he'd mentioned it in passing, once, in a cold, distant way. I felt a sting each time he talked about her. But I didn't know how to say it. I didn't know how to say that his growing emotional connection with her made me feel like I was being replaced, like the person who used to matter to him was slowly disappearing. One Thursday afternoon, after a particularly long day at work, I returned home to find an envelope sitting on the kitchen counter. It was thick, formal-looking, and unmistakably from a lawyer's office. My heart dropped into my stomach as I picked it up. Mark had filed for divorce. The papers were there, staring at me, waiting to be signed, waiting for me to face the reality of what had happened. I sat down heavily at the table, the air in the room suddenly thick and suffocating. The weight of the divorce, of what I had done, pressed on my chest. I opened the envelope, my hands trembling slightly as I pulled out the papers. There was a part of me that had been expecting this, but seeing it in black and white hit me harder than I imagined. The divorce was happening. It was real now. I stared at the papers, my eyes welling up with tears, but I didn't let them fall. I couldn't. I didn't deserve to cry. I had done this. I had created this mess. I had pushed Mark away with my reckless choices, my desperation for something new, something exciting. I thought I could have both, freedom and stability, but now I was losing both. The next day, Mark showed up at the house. He wasn't home much anymore, and his visits were becoming more sporadic. When I saw his car parked outside, a knot of dread twisted in my stomach. I wasn't sure what to expect this time, but when I opened the door, Mark was standing there, holding the divorce papers in his hand, looking tired and worn. He didn't say anything at first. He just stood there, staring at me with an unreadable expression. For a moment, I thought maybe he was going to say something, something that would change everything, something that would bring us back together. But then, he spoke, his voice colder than it had ever been. "I can't keep doing this, Louise. I've thought about it, and I've made up my mind." I nodded, my throat tight. "I know." He looked at me, his eyes hard. "I can't be with someone who doesn't respect me, someone who doesn't trust me, someone who can't see what we had, what we built." My chest tightened as the words sank in. He was right. I had broken our marriage with my actions, my selfishness. I had chosen excitement over the steady, safe love we had. And now, it was too late. "I know, Mark. I never wanted to hurt you." I whispered, the words catching in my throat. Mark's gaze softened for a brief moment, but the wall between us was still there. "It doesn't matter now. It's done." The finality in his voice made me feel like I was drowning. He wasn't angry anymore, not the way he had been that night. But there was a sense of resignation in him, like he had given up on trying to make things work. And I had no one to blame but myself. "I don't want to fight with you," he continued, his voice barely audible. "But I can't keep pretending like everything is fine. I can't keep living in this, This limbo. I need to move on. I felt a lump in my throat, but I nodded. What could I say? What could I possibly say that would make him stay, that would undo the damage I had done? There was nothing left to say. I get it. I managed, my voice barely above a whisper. Mark handed me the divorce papers, his fingers brushing mine for a second. It was the first time I had felt that kind of physical distance between us, like he was handing me the end of us. His eyes flickered to the papers, and then back to me, before he sighed. I'll take the kids to Emily's place for the weekend, he said, his tone matter of fact. We can talk more later, but for now, I need space. I nodded again, unable to form words. It was easier this way. We both needed space. We needed to heal. Or maybe we needed to just move on. Mark turned to leave, but before he did, he looked back at me one last time. I don't hate you, Louise. I just don't know who you are anymore. With those words, he left, the door closing softly behind him. I stood there in the silence that followed, the house now more empty than ever. I had made my bed, and now I had to lie in it. Divorce wasn't something I had ever wanted, but it was the result of my choices. And now, I had to face it. As I sat down on the couch, staring at the divorce papers in my hands, I realized something that I had been avoiding for months. I was alone. I had wanted freedom, but what I had gained was emptiness. The excitement I had chased had only led to the destruction of the family I had spent years building. And now, I had to rebuild. But this time, there would be no one left to lean on. The divorce was finalized. It wasn't a dramatic court battle or a public spectacle. There was no big fight, no tearful outbursts in front of lawyers. Instead, it was quiet, civil, almost too quiet. Mark and I had agreed on the terms without too much resistance. Joint custody of the kids, the house divided, and everything else set in a way that allowed us to part without too much bitterness. At least on paper. But nothing had really prepared me for the emotional fallout. The kids had their father's house now, and they seemed to adapt, though I could feel the distance growing between us. Matthew barely spoke to me anymore, and Zara, the younger one, would only talk to me in short, hesitant sentences. It wasn't just the divorce. It was everything I had done to tear apart the stability they had known. They were hurt, and no matter how much I wanted to fix it, I couldn't. I had become a shell of the person I once was. My reflection in the mirror looked the same, but inside, I felt empty, like I was floating through a life that no longer made sense. I tried to fill the void in different ways. More work, more nights out with friends, more distractions. But nothing worked. I wasn't really living. I was existing, and it was becoming unbearable. And then, after a particularly difficult conversation with my therapist, it hit me. I had to rebuild my life from the ground up. This was the moment I had to start again, for myself and for my kids. It wasn't easy. The first few weeks after the divorce were the hardest. I spent most of my time trying to force myself out of bed in the mornings, forcing myself to get through the day. But slowly, something shifted. I started to realize that I was stronger than I had given myself credit for. I wasn't just the wife or the mother anymore. I was me. I was Louise, and I had been lost for so long that I had forgotten what it felt like to just be me. I joined a yoga class, something I'd always wanted to try but never had time for. At first, I was terrible at it. Awkward in the poses, stiff in my movements. But with time, I started feeling a connection to myself again. The quiet moments in the class helped me breathe again, helped me reconnect with who I was without needing to be anyone else. It wasn't a magic fix, but it was a start. It was also the first time I had something for myself that wasn't tied to anyone else's expectations, just mine. It felt good. It felt like I was taking my first steps back into the world, after everything had fallen apart. Meanwhile, Mark had settled into his new routine with the kids. I didn't hear from him much, and it felt like the distance between us had become more permanent with each passing day. He had his own life now, and I couldn't blame him. He had every right to find happiness, even if it wasn't with me. The idea that we were forever tethered to one another, through our shared history and our children, was a hard pill to swallow. But I had no choice but to accept it. Then, a few months after the divorce, Emily invited me out for coffee. I was surprised, given how distant everything had become between Mark and me, but I agreed to meet her anyway. When I arrived at the cafe, she was already there, sitting at a table by the window, a warm cup of tea in front of her. Emily had always been the more pragmatic of the two, always able to offer a perspective that I never saw. and I was glad she was still there for me, even if it wasn't in the way I had hoped. "How are you holding up?" Emily asked when I sat down, her voice soft but sincere. There was no judgment in her tone, just a genuine desire to know. I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "Honestly, some days are better than others. I'm trying to figure out who I am now, without all the labels, you know?" Emily nodded thoughtfully. "I get that. I've seen Mark, and he's not the same either. You know, he's trying to be there for the kids, but I can tell it's hard on him. On all of you." "I know," I said, my voice quiet. "It's not just the divorce. It's the way everything shifted so fast. And I don't know how to fix it." "You don't have to fix it," Emily said gently. "You're not broken, Louise. You're just changing. You're figuring out who you are now, and it's going to take time. But you'll get there." I looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in a long time. She was right. I didn't have to fix everything. I just had to start living again, on my own terms. And that realization was a weight lifted. I didn't need Mark's approval. I didn't need to live up to anyone else's expectations. I just needed to be okay with myself. As I left the cafe, I felt lighter than I had in months. I didn't have all the answers, and I knew it would take time to rebuild the relationships that mattered to me. But for the first time since the divorce, I felt like I was moving forward. Slowly, but surely. I would always love Mark in some way. We had shared a life together, a family, memories that no one could take away. But we had both changed, and the marriage that had once been a safe, comfortable space was no longer the place I needed to be. The hardest part was accepting that, but now, I understood it, and I could move on. As for my kids, it wasn't easy, but they needed me to be strong, for them and for myself. They needed to see that life didn't end with the end of a marriage. They needed to know that it was okay to be vulnerable, to change, and to grow. They needed to see me becoming the woman I had always been underneath it all, the woman I had buried for so long. And I would be that woman. For them, for me, and for the future I had yet to fully build. I was finally ready to start living again,